This is so exciting. It really takes the regulator to make a Reg Tech conference this cool, so it's really a privilege to be here. So I'm Diana Perez, I'm the CEO and co-founder of SUADE, and we build regulatory technology for banks. We wanted to present to you guys the 5-data format. We really believe that there's a lot of opportunities to make data much better for our industry. So to start, we as a company wanted to ask ourselves the question, so how do you prevent the next financial crisis? It's a big question. It's very important to ask yourself that when you're trying to build good technology for regulation. And we found that the only way forward was regulation. It really needed to be embraced. And so when you're trying to automate regulatory technology and the process that we do in the industry between the interaction of regulations and the banks and trying to digitize this process, and you're really trying to take a software-driven approach, you're really talking about focusing on the data and communication of data across the industry. And we realized very quickly that that was a huge problem. So when you think about some of the things the panelists were mentioning before, this is very much in line with trying to solve some of these problems. So most of you are probably very familiar with the reality about financial systems and legacy systems in their industry. So pre-crisis banking was a very dimensional, one-dimensional approach where the regulation was really built as a backstop. It was not really something that was focused. So when you think about it, the way the systems were actually designed in the industry pre-crisis was very one-dimensional with the regulation as an afterthought. Now, the reality post-crisis is that the data has really surfaced as a priority. So it needs to be interacting and transferring and going between different systems. It really needs to have much better connectivity. And what you're talking about really is that with all the regulation changes, the data has become more and more corrupt inside the industry. So what we really believe is that the future of banking is about redesigning the architecture that you have inside your banks, including the regulation at the very core of it. And so a lot of our work has been about creating solutions and technology that really allow for that. So we're talking about tools that have the flexibility to deal with the regulation and help our clients to really improve the regulation at the core of it. So we always say that we bridge the regulatory gap with modern technology. And the thing is, what makes our modern technology possible is their discipline around data. So this is why, when we're thinking not just about the future of banking and the architecture inside a bank, but also for the future for the industry, right? You have to start thinking about what data is supposed to be doing long term. So between financial services and financial FIs effectively communicating with each other, data needs to be able to go from one place to the other much more flexibly. Between the banks and the regulators, right? So you're talking about the way that right now data is transferred between a financial entity and the regulator is not great at all. The regulators need to be transferring data between each other. And so you end up looking at this big matrix and ecosystem of data that needs to be transferred much more powerfully, much more fluidly than what we're seeing right now. And earlier this week, actually, we had a gentleman that was asking the question, so how do you find where is your sensitive data? And the reality is that right now, the way that the industry and the systems are designed, it's very difficult to identify that in our matrix of data across the industry. So what we're trying to get to is really a world where it's not a dream anymore, where you can really understand it, because you're getting to a very granular level of your data. You understand your data fundamentally, and it means that you can understand where it's sensitive, where there could be things that could be hacked, the security could be breached, where there could be real systemic problems for the industry. So, trends in regulations, when you're actually talking about regulatory data, it's very important to also remember what is behind all of this. So the complexity in the data, you're talking about big data, right? Everyone talks about big data all the time, so fundamentally what we believe is that you're trying to go from the big data to the small data that the regulator actually wants to see. And that's very important to keep in mind. The other thing is that you're looking really at frequent change, right? So every time the laws change, more is added to your databases, to the data. It keeps corrupting effectively the system. So you need to have something that's flexible enough to change as the regulation changes as well. The cost. So everyone in the industry is looking at reducing costs, right? So there's nothing that's happening right now in banking that is not a cost reduction exercise. So, the panels you were mentioning before, so how do you work with startups? Well, you can't really if you're looking at the kind of seismic cost that is happening in the industry because of this data. So when we're trying to look at this regulatory data problem, it's also very important to remember the cost it has in the industry, because it's actually a huge space where things can be saved. And finally, amongst everything that we're trying to get out of this regulatory data, we're talking also about transparency. Right? So transparency has become a huge topic, not just because the regulators want that, but also because consumers are expecting that more and more. So we started asking ourselves, what does this industry really need, right, to get to this, fantastic communication of data and transfer that can go from one place to the other? How do we get to really build a technology for Regulation 2020, right? How do you actually build a system that works for the post-crisis environment that we're in? And the answer is standards. And so that was mentioned as well before. It is something that we need to urgently look at. So standards are a huge, huge topic. People keep talking about it, but what we need is actually some action in the space. So we had one of the speakers yesterday when he met us. We're a company based in London. He met us. He was very excited to say, you guys can be the Google of regulation, which we thought was fantastic. That's a huge compliment, of course. But I think that it's actually quite exciting as a technology company to ask yourself, so what would Google do? How would Google take care of this mass amount of data that we have in our industry? So what's exciting with Google is that they do deal with a lot of data. They've actually done this before. They've looked at all sorts of different other industries where they very successfully looked at streamlining data. So for example, for transport, right? For transport data, we will look at regulating transport data, and they did that with standards, right? So when you think about your Google map, how do you go from A to B? How, what's the quickest route, what's the slowest one? How long does it take directions? All of this is possible because all the major authorities around the world have come together and released their bus schedules, timetables, all sorts of information in that standard, right? And so that's made Google Maps possible. But not just Google Maps, it's made all sorts of innovations. So this project started in 2006, and 10 years later, data from transport is not a mystical thing anymore. People understand it, they can create innovation. And so what we need to really get here is that data standards make software possible, right? They make innovation possible. So it's very funny when we talk to people, and I'm having a lot of fintech peers who they're really flabbergasted by the complexities of financial data in our industry. And you have a lot of fintechs that always ask for, dummy data from banks. And the reality is that so banks don't give dummy data. Please don't do that because it actually can bring even more risk, I believe. The reality is that if you get data from a bank, and everyone knows that if you get data, let alone from one system inside the same bank to another system, it will be completely different. Then if you get data from one bank to another bank, it will be completely different. So whatever an innovator builds on dummy data is going to be completely redundant for the realities of what an innovation and scalability and standardization really should be about. So this is the beauty of data standards, is that it allows innovation because it actually allows innovators to create their own dummy data and test it and play with things much more flexibly. And Google Maps itself was built with standards, right? So all of technology is built from standard to standard. And so it's something, from JavaScript to HTML to networks, CSV, everything around us is based on standards. The internet that we take so much for granted is based on standards, right? And so wherever you see fluid transfer of data and information and actual innovation, it happens on top of standards. So, thing in finance, right, that why are we so scared of making data standards for regulation? I mean, we have some in finance already, right? There's a lot of very successful stories around data standards for the financial industry, but there's just not enough. And what we need to remember is that every time there has been a leap in the way that the financial industry interacts with data, starts transferring data, there's been a standard. From SWIFT to electronic trading and FX to derivatives, the era of derivatives was possible thanks to FPML, and now we are in the regulatory era. So when there was the FinTech Awards yesterday, we were talking about this Woodstock moment for fintech, I also think this is a Woodstock moment for Reg Tech. I think we really need to bite the bullet and accept that we need to really start building regulatory data standards. So the beauty for us as a fintech and a Reg Tech and innovators is that we can actually just do it, right? And be very, very naive about it. And so what's been quite exciting is that we've really been able to think about what makes a good standard. So we started thinking that one important thing is actually to build the standards. It's not about reinventing the wheel, right? And so if there is a good ISO definition, if there's a good definition from the regulators, something that's out there that makes sense, we concatenate it and we work with that to actually continue building the standard, to make it stronger, right? It's not about reinventing the wheel, it's about making the wheel better and go faster. It has to be something that is not a competitive advantage. So if you think of HTML, it's not how you make a website. It's the content in your website that makes your competitive advantage. So what do we have in the financial industry that is not a competitive advantage to everybody? It's actually regulation. So when you talk about data standards for the financial industry, regulatory data is a great place to start. It needs to be simple. It cannot be gibberish, right? The beauty of the standard that is usable by everyone is that a developer that has not gone from all the transformations from Basel I to Basel II, Basel III, that does not necessarily know anything but MiFID, can actually take that and start doing something with it. So you're talking, so for us, use a plain text format, and it's not a database model, right? It is really a separation of concerns between your database and what the regulation is trying to get to. So what's really important to remember here is that it's not about how to store your data. It's about how you start transferring data from one place to the other. And then it's also very important to have clear purpose. So what's been beautiful for us is that we have concatenated real data that we use for reports from our clients and build this bottom up. So it's fit for purpose. So the reason it's been so successful is because it's really been built for the problems that we're finding in the industry. So it's also a reality that when you have to be very strict about what you're trying to do when you're looking at a standard. So for us, if the regulator doesn't want to see that data, it's not part of the project. And so in many ways what we're doing is that we're really democratizing our expertise about regulatory data, and we're very proud of that. So one of the other things that was fantastic for us is that the project is supported by the European Commission and also the ODI, which is the Open Data Institute in Europe. So why are they so interested, for example? Because they're part of this conversation around like open APIs, the open banking group. Why are people that are so interested in open data interested in supporting something like this? Because when you're trying to think about open data that can be shared in the industry, the best data is actually the data that the banks are already sending out, that they're already giving out there, which is to regulators, right? That's the reality. So a lot of very good, valuable data that could be open and shared for academics and fintechs and all sorts of people is actually regulatory data. And it is an open source project, so it's a proper Apache license, everyone can use it. It's been very successful both with fintech. So for example, the SUADE had a hackathon a couple of weeks ago, actually last week, and so we participated as judges and panelists, but we presented our schema for the developers, and they loved it, right? Because it's done in a very simple way for them to understand, to be able to create dummy data that is real financial data for the purposes of doing an innovation. So the objectives of the FIRE schema, right, so the financial regulatory data schema, was to improve regulatory data, right? And so the reason why that's so important is because we're talking about quality and control, governance for financial institutions. So when you start thinking back about where is the sensitive data, right, can you actually make a heat map of where is the sensitive data if you don't have a real discipline and a real understanding at a granular level of what your data actually does inside your entity. Comparability and more transparency also for the supervisors. How are the supervisors supposed to really get supervised in the correct fashion if the data from one bank to the other, or still digging further down, makes actually no sense? And finally, you're talking really of much more seamless integration for the fintechs, for third parties, and this is why this is so important, because it's really ultimately about creating an ecosystem that's more transparent and stable and cheaper for consumers as well. So how to contribute? In if you're a developer, you can go to the GitHub repository, with schemas and development tools. And if you're a lawyer or a consultant or people that work on the reg policy side inside banks, you can contribute to the documentation. And it's been really exciting because we have more than 150 banks in Europe that have subscribed. We're obviously, as we expand geographically, we're looking forward to continue bringing fire everywhere. And if you want to subscribe to the mailing list, you can go to our website and find more information about that. So, get involved, be bold, play with fire. I think that, for us as technologists, we fundamentally believe that a good standard gets adopted because it's actually good. And so the more intelligent people interact with it and actually contribute, the better it is. So we're very excited to have as many people as possible, contribute as well. But the last thing that I wanted to leave you with, right, is the reality. For us, the FIRE schema has been not just about regulatory data, it's also been about being able to push the boundary and really the thought leadership that we can bring to the industry. Because there is a reality that when we start looking at regulation and the financial industry in general, we need a bit more, activity, and we need things to move a bit faster. So the beauty of being an entrepreneur and a Reg Tech, a fintech, a startup, and an innovator is that you learn fast and you fail fast. So for us, it's been really fantastic is that a group of individuals who know what they're doing, because that's also very important, of course, but then, who are passionate and who are eager to do things and to create proper technology can actually release things that are pragmatic for the industry in an agile fashion. So I think that it's very important to always remember that sometimes when you start looking at standards, it's not so much about having a philosophical conversation around the table, but to also just do it and get cracking with it and try to build something that can be useful for the industry. So thank you very much.